Okay. Hi folks, if you can see me out there, let me get down here a little lower. Can you see me? I don't need to come lower. Anyway, turbo talk. Where are we on the turbo talk? Well, my last video, I was going to put in the injectors. I did that and got everything all hooked up. And the test I'm going to do today is to check them for internal and external fuel leakage. By that I mean, obviously does gas shoot out from somewhere on the outside, or have a bad connection. But also I'd like to make sure that when I shut the pump off, that it'll hold pressure. The turbos, if the injectors are leaking, then you'll end up having fuel squirting down and it'll lose pressure that way. You could lose pressure through the fuel pressure regulator not working properly. And lastly, I could lose pressure because the fuel pump check valve isn't working right. So I'm going to start by just turning on the pump, letting it run, making sure that the fuel pressure regulator is holding. It should be somewhere between 36 and 40 psi when the engine's not running like it is now. So we'll just got all hooked up and ready to roll. Well, I'll show you the injectors first. I'll tell you what I did. What I did there was I did install the injectors without the fuel rail, and then I put some lubricant on the fuel rail where it plugs in, a little bit of oil, and just so they slip in. And then I tightened up all the clamps, and I made sure I had the injectors clocked in such a way that it make it easy for me to plug in the wiring harness when that time comes. You gotta be careful because you don't put the injector in some weird place where you can't plug in the wiring harness. But let me show you that first, and then we'll reset up and I'll show you how the fuel pump test goes. Starting with the injector install, this is what I'm talking about, the clocking. This is like 2 o'clock, that's like 10 o'clock. I try to do pretty much all of them at 2 o'clock and 10 o'clock so that you have an easy way to get the injectors harness plugged in. I don't know if that's the way it came from the factory. I don't remember, don't recall how it was set up. What I said before was I attached all the fuel injectors to the manifold first, and then I just put a little lubrication on each one of these metal fittings on the fuel rail, and then wiggled it into place. It's pretty tight, pretty hard to get in there. It took a little bit of work to really push on it, then just slip in. Am I concerned about it leaking from around where the lubricant is? No. I mean, I can't imagine a little bit of oil being a problem. I mean, it's clamped. There's a little bubble flare there on the end of it. Should keep it all solid. This is the thing I'm going to be looking for here. Any fuel come out of this? That's a fuel pressure regulator. There's a rubber diaphragm. I think it's rubber in there. If that were to spring a leak and you get fuel coming out of here, which would be bad, its job is to take whatever the fuel pressure the fuel pump's putting out, maintain it at a specific pressure. That pressure is controlled by the vacuum. So that's why I'm saying this is a test with no vacuum. The engine's not running, so it should be right around 36 to 40 psi. Whatever it doesn't use, whatever excess fuel is not being used, like in this case, no fuel will be used, so it'll just cycle through the fuel rail and pump back out the excess while maintaining a pressure of 40 psi. The excess comes back through a return line. This being the return line, the lower leg is a return line. This is the inlet line. Goes through a fuel pump connected to a pressure gauge down here. Through the fuel pump. The fuel pump, I said before, I'm using a clear inlet just so I can kind of make sure I can see fuel flowing through it. I've got a clamp there. It's not clamped tightly, it's clamped loosely, but my idea is once I fire the pump and run it and let it cycle and check for fuel leaks, I'm going to turn it off and then rapidly shut off this return valve and see if it'll hold pressure. I mean, theoretically, it should hold a little bit of pressure up here. There's not a lot of place for the pressure to be stored. I mean, you can't store pressure in a hard line. There's nothing to expand. So the only pressure you'd see is the fuel that's stuck inside these hoses. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Yeah. It's got to blow up like a little balloon in order to maintain pressure. If this is a solid hard line, another way to look at, if this is a solid hard line all the way through, I mean, you use 1 drop of fuel pressure's gone, right? Because it's just, unless you heat up the fuel in the line with a heat, I mean, I guess that could make it increase in pressure. But generally speaking, yeah, these cars, especially these Z cars, they don't hold pressure for a long period of time. A lot of people think they do, like, oh, it's not holding pressure overnight. Well, no, it's not holding. It holds pressure for 5 minutes. That's fantastic. Nothing to get excited about. Anyway, let's shoot the fuel pump off. I'll try to re-aim here so you get a better view of what I'm talking about. Okay, let's do that, and we'll turn the camera a little bit. And I'm going to go ahead and engage the pump, and I'll see if I can show you that fuel pressure gauge. So we're just going to run it wide open right now. Oh, I lost my connection to the battery. This is just a temporary hookup, obviously. I'm just trying to. Dang it. Gotta get some better clamps on this thing, right? And I know you guys don't mind watching me fiddle around endlessly with wires. Okay, there we go. So the fuel pump's running. I'm right at about 39, almost 40 psi. So what's happening now is the pump's just cycling fuel through and back out again. So let's take a look. Let's look for fuel leaks. These should have clamps, but pretty tight fitting. I don't see any leaks coming around here. I don't see any gas spewing out anywhere here. I'm going to look around the fuel injectors. I'm looking for dampness around these connections here. I should have a clamp there. That's a missing clamp. I don't see anything coming out of the out of this vacuum fitting. That's a good sign. I don't see any fuel dripping anywhere. So what that tells me is I don't have any external fuel leaks, which is good. Yes, this time it makes a lot of noise when it runs. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to attempt to shut it off and then clamp this thing really quickly. That would shut off, because I don't think there's a good check valve in this fuel pump. And it should have a check valve. An OE pump has a check valve built into it that would stop the return flow of fuel. I mean, the return flow of fuel should be stopped because the fuel regulator will stop it on the outlet side. But the inlet side, there's no check valve here. It's free to just go right back out again. Let's try it and see. I'm going to clamp and do this at the same time here. Oops, my bad. There we go. Oh, this doesn't look good. I get a lot. It's pumping out past that thing. All right, so let's unclamp it. So my fuel pressure loss, what happened there was probably the pressure that was in the system caused, and since I'm clamping here, caused the leak to take place there. So I really wanted to test this better. I'd have to clamp it up here, I think, or make sure that hose clamp works. So we're going to do that again because that was not a good test at all. Stand by. This is live, folks. I don't edit my videos. Occasionally we have foul-ups. But that's how you learn. I mean, you don't learn anything from your successes. You tend to, well, maybe you do, but you learn a lot more from your failures. So I'm going to tighten this up and see if I can stop that from happening. Oh yeah. It wasn't on there very tight at all. Okay. So we'll unplug this. That's not tight again. I'll run this fuel pump again. Pressure's built up. And then we clamp off and turn it off. And it's dropping down. And I don't know if it's leaking from there or well, but it's definitely losing pressure. So the big question is it coming from here? Am I not? Well, here, let's do this. Let me see what happens if I squeeze this thing here. Nothing happens. I don't know. Well, what we can do is maybe it's leaking pressure back through the return line. Again, I said the pressure regulator should keep that from happening, but I mean, if you clamp off the inlet line so that it can't go back out that way, and if you clamp off the return line so it can't go back through the regulator, then the only point of return would be the injectors, right? Now I don't have a clamp handy, so what I'm going to try to do, actually maybe a pair of vice grips. Hold on. Stand by. Might be able to just fold that tube in half. I'll just try to fold the tube in half. Let's see how pliable it is. So what we're going to do now is just, well, I guess I could just look at this and see if anything's coming out. Could do that too. Or we'll just do that. We're just going to clamp it like that. Okay? Now return, basically deadhead the thing. So we're going to do both the things. Only this time I'm going to clamp both sides. Fire the pump. Okay. Now I'm going to do this and clamp this. Clamp and clamp. Okay, now both sides are cut off. And it's still slowly dropping. I open it up and see if it drops any faster. Not really. Try it again. Ooh. That's pretty exciting, right? Sparks. If I close this off, it should shoot up. Yep. Ooh, I don't like that. All right, so close it off. Well, I'm definitely getting a drop in fuel pressure. I don't know if I have, I'm going to stop that right now. I don't know if I have a problem with an injector leaking or if it's just an incomplete seal by my attempt to clamp or do that. Honestly though, I don't get too, like I said, I don't get too excited about that unless you've got, you know, a real problem with it running. I wouldn't worry about it. In fact, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and pull the spark plugs out and look to see if I can see any fuel, because if it's leaking, it may be getting past one of the, I'm sure one of the exhaust valves is open. That would be a good test because it could be any number of them. Yeah, you know, at this point I'm not going to worry about it. I just want to make sure that the external leaks were being handled and the fuel pressure is right. If I have an injector that's a little bit stuck, I'll worry about that when I get the thing test running. It'll run rich and I'll be able to find out what's going on. I checked all those injectors. They're all new old stock injectors. They held vacuum. They held pressure. The pintle was holding against it, so I'm assuming it was okay. And again, my more likely cause here of this leak, what you saw there, is a poor clamping action I'm getting at the fuel line, either the inlet or the exit. I don't think it's a injector issue. I don't think it's a fuel pressure regulator, because with that much happening, I would expect to see some leakage at this point coming out of here. I'm not. So that's it for now. The next big hurdle is going to be to hook up the ECU. I mean, there's not much else to do. So, well, I think I mentioned before, I have to find a way to mount the ignition coil. And there's that ignition coil is actually triggered by a transistor, which I got out of a junkyard car. So I'll have to figure out a way to mount that transistor externally. We'll do that, and then I'll hook it off, and when I get there, I'll come back. But it might be a little while. Anyway, thanks for watching. Bye.